Welcome to another installment of Grain of Salt. I'm your host, Wild Bill. You know, in my last video, I kind of talked about the dream thing and the destiny thing. I think it is a disguise for covetousness and promoting one's self. And if you want to, you can dig into that, or you can disagree with me. That's fine. That's fine. But I know it's popular out there. But I think it's a distraction from here and now. And I know you probably got 100 scriptures, But those scriptures I know too, and we could look at those individually and in context. And that's what matters, right? Context is king. And that's what we got to be careful of, is that we don't take things out of their setting and make them say what we want them to say. And in fact, when we talk about Peter here, it's going to seem like, well, he says, something about Peter's future, and I get that. So, like I said, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I can be wrong, but I know that in my life, I bought this thing about destiny and dreaming, getting a dream, and pretty much selling my soul to it, I got disillusioned, and I finally had to come back to reality and live right now. So anyway, continuing on with Peter, he was earmarked for a special purpose, we said in the last video, and he started out as a misfit. He messed up quite a bit. He opened his mouth when he shouldn't have, and he failed at walking on water. Boy, people get on him about that. Why didn't he just continue to believe? So whatever. But he cut somebody's ear off when he shouldn't have, and he denied Christ 3 times. Why didn't he just listen to Jesus and admit that could happen? And all this. I mean, we throw a lot at Peter, poor old feller. But he did have problems, just like us. And he had to grow, right? I mean, look at what he turned out to be, though. Look at the first 12 chapters of the book of Acts, and you see the great exploits of Peter. You see the mighty things that God used him in. I mean, he was the key, or one of the main keys in the birth of the church at Jerusalem. I mean, he was to be the firm, dynamic, and gifted leader of the church. And Peter, the misfit. So, Peter, and throughout Peter's walk with the Messiah there, he saw miracles, he heard words from heaven. Amen. And we know that he walked on the water. He saw the transfigured Christ right in front of his eyes with 2 other boys. And I'm talking about James and John. He saw Lazarus raised from the dead. He saw the resurrected Messiah. And yet he still was a little bit flaky. Even though he saw all these wonderful things and experienced these wonderful things there, but after the resurrection, he was still a little bit flaky. And in John chapter 21, he was told to go to Galilee with the rest of the boys and wait. But instead, what did he do? He said, I'm going fishing. He got impatient, and he went to do what he wanted to do. And, the rest, knowing that Peter was gifted in leadership, they said, we're going to go too. They all went fishing. So we know that Peter had to be firmed up and rooted, right? I mean, he had a big responsibility that he was going to be given. And he had to be tried and tested and set apart and strengthened. He had to know that he could become unshakable and seasoned and set in place. These are all thoughts that I've had about Peter. Why? Why did he have to be set in place and be firmed up? Well, John chapter 21 tells us Jesus looked at Peter and he said, truly, truly, I say to you, Peter, when you were younger, you girded yourself and you walked where you wished. You did whatever you wanted to do, Peter. But when you're old, you shall stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and take you to where you don't want to go. You know, and we know what that means, because the very next verse says that it was signifying by what death Peter would glorify God. And that's important, because Peter, previously in his life, he had problems with paying the price, doing whatever it took to glorify God. But Jesus was telling him, that's what your purpose is. And I believe he tells every single one of us that our whole lives, and even our death, whatever the cost, is to bring glory to God. That's the point of that story. Not to go out there and sell destiny to people. That's to say, Peter, and then he looked at him and said, and follow me. You do what I tell you to do. Because he turned around and he said, what about that feller? Talking about John. He said, don't worry about him. If he lives until I come again, you do what I tell you to do. You know, people are so messed up. And they go out there and they try to get people sidetracked with other things other than the glory of God and giving glory to God and following him. You know, Paul's another example. Thought about him. You know, Paul said this over in Philippians. He said, the Messiah shall be made great in my body, whether by life or whether by death. That sounds like somebody that was willing to pay the ultimate price. He said in the next verse there, that's Philippians chapter 1, he said in the next verse, he said, for to me is Christ, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Take all that with a grain of salt. We'll talk more later.